The Baal Shem Tov was famous for going on long walks, long strolls. And one time he was going on a walk and he notices that there's this great holy spiritual something coming from somewhere. And he feels this light and he needs to know where it's coming from. So in the distance he sees a synagogue and he says it must be coming from there. And so he goes to the synagogue. And he enters the synagogue, and in the synagogue he sees that there's one man in the corner who's praying very intensely. And the Baal Shem Tov does not want to disturb this man. So an hour passes, 2 hours pass, finally 4 hours pass, and the man finishes his prayers. And the Baal Shem Tov has waited all this time. And finally the Baal Shem Tov approaches this man, and the man can't believe it. Like he'd been praying so carefully that he didn't notice that anyone had walked into the synagogue, and all of a sudden he sees the Baal Shem Tov, and knowing who the Baal Shem Tov is and how famous he was and how amazing the Baal Shem Tov was, he can't believe it. Like, I'm in the same synagogue as Baal Shem Tov. Like, wow, like, Rebbe, why are you here? And the man bursts into tears and he says, Rebbe, Baal Shem Tov, the reason that I pray so long is because I not good with the prayers. I never know when to say which prayer, and I mix it up. So what I do is I just start at the beginning of the prayer book, and the time everyone finishes, and I'm still doing the prayer book, but I don't know what prayers to say, and I'm afraid to ask anyone. So I just say the whole prayer book, and when I finish, it takes me almost all day. And the Baal Shem Tov said, Yaakov, would you like me to help you to show you when to say which prayers? And Rav Yaakov, his face lights up. He says to Baal Shem Tov, yes, I'd love that, Rebbe, please. So the two men, they spend the next couple of hours. The Baal Shem Tov writes some notes for Rav Yaakov to put into his siddur, his sefer, his prayer book, so he'll know which prayers to say at which hours. And Rav Yaakov is so happy. He says, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the Baal Shem Tov, he goes on his way. So after the Baal Shem Tov has left, Rav Yaakov is so ecstatic that for the first time in his life, he's going to know how to pray with everyone else. He's going to know which prayers to say at which times. That he's dancing with his prayer book in hand. And he's dancing so hard that all of a sudden, all the papers that the Baal Shem Tov had written out for him and put in his prayer book, they all scattered to the ground. And Rav Yaakov can't believe it. I just spent all this time, I encountered the Baal Shem Tov, and he helped me, and now I'm going to learn how to pray, and now it's all ruined. What am I going to do? So he realizes, I have to go run after the Baal Shem Tov. But the Baal Shem Tov was known to walk extremely fast. So as soon as Rav Yaakov goes out of the synagogue, the Baal Shem Tov's already way ahead of him. And Rav Yaakov's running and running, trying to catch up. And he's panting. And he's trying to catch up to the Baal Shem Tov. And he's trying to scream, but the Baal Shem Tov can't hear him. And he keeps running. And finally, he sees that the Baal Shem Tov is coming to a body of water. And he realizes, I'm for sure going to catch up to the Baal Shem Tov now. There's nowhere for the Baal Shem Tov to go. He can only go back. He can't go forward anymore. But then he sees that the Baal Shem Tov, who's wearing something called a gartel around his waist, which is the thing in Judaism that a lot of men wear around their waist. It's a very holy thing to wear. And he sees that the Baal Shem Tov takes off this gartel, he stretches it across the water, and then he walks across the water, the little river, as if it's a bridge. And the man thinks to himself, how did the Baal Shem Tov just do that? Like, that's a miracle. That's insane. I mean, he knows that the Baal Shem Tov is a miracle worker and is a very holy rabbi, but to actually see that with his own eyes, it's incredible. And he realizes, okay, I really need to catch up to me. So he's running, and he gets to the body of water, and without even thinking, he takes off his own gartel that he's wearing, he puts it on the water, and he also walks across. And finally, he's able to catch up to the Baal Shem Tov. He says, Baal Shem Tov, please slow down, turn around. And the Baal Shem Tov finally hears him. He says, Rav Yaakov, what are you doing here? And Rav Yaakov says, well, Rebbe, I was so excited. You taught me how to properly pray, how to properly daven. I was dancing, and all the papers fell out of the siddur. Will you please put the papers back in the right place for me so that I can learn how to daven? And the Baal Shem Tov looks at him and he says, but Rav Yaakov, what are you doing here? And Rav Yaakov's thinking to himself, I just told you what I'm doing here. But again, he wants to be respectful. He repeats himself, Rebbe, I was dancing and the prayer, I wanted to know how to say the prayers right, and the papers fell out. Could you please help me? But the Baal Shem Tov once again says, but Rav Yaakov, what are you doing here? How did you get here? And Rav Yaakov says, well, Rebbe, I saw that you took out your gartel, you put it across the river, and you crossed. So when I got to the river, I took off my gartel, I put it across the river, and I crossed too. And the Baal Shem Tov said to Rav Yaakov, you don't need my papers. The way that you have been praying is more than just fine. And that's the end of the story. So what's the lesson that we're learning here? The Baal Shem Tov was at such a holy level. He was able to perform a miracle, taking off his gartel and using it as like a bridge to cross the river. Here's this man, Rav Yaakov, who's this very simple man, who doesn't even know which prayers to say at which times. Yet he still had that ability that the Baal Shem Tov had. And when the Baal Shem Tov saw that Rav Yaakov was able to do that too, he realized that this person, Rav Yaakov, he didn't need any papers that the Baal Shem Tov could give him. The way that he was praying was more than enough.